What if the garbage you drag to the curb every morning is worth more than you ever imagined? What if the moment that bag leaves your hands, it enters one of the most powerful and secretive industries on the planet? Every single day, billions of people throw things away without a second thought. A plastic bottle, a torn cardboard box, the remains of last night's dinner. Gone. Forgotten. But what if nothing about that process is as simple as it appears? What if your trash is not the end of something, but the beginning? There is a global business worth over $1 trillion built entirely on the things people discard. It operates in the shadows of everyday life. And buried at its very center is one deeply strange detail. The wealthiest nations on Earth are paying other countries to take their garbage. Why would anyone pay to give something away? That question is going to take you somewhere you never expected. Think about the last time you took out the trash. Did you wonder where it was going? Did you ask who would handle it next? Or what would happen to it after the truck drove away? Almost nobody does. And that moment of not caring, that instant of forgetting, is the foundation on which an entire industry has been constructed. The second your waste leaves your property, it stops being yours. It becomes part of a system that most people will never see and that a very small number of people profit from enormously. Who are those people? Where exactly does waste travel once it disappears from your street? And who made the decisions that determine its path? The waste industry is not simply about trucks and landfills. Behind every collection truck is a private contractor. Behind that contractor is a regional corporation. Behind that corporation are global logistics networks, commodity brokers, and processing facilities spread across multiple continents. Your discarded shampoo bottle may travel further than you have in the past 5 years. And who controls all of that movement? The answer is not a government agency. It is not an environmental body. It is a constellation of private corporations operating under regulatory frameworks that differ so dramatically from one country to the next that almost anything can be made to look legal, on paper, from the right angle. The strangest part of this system keeps pulling every investigation back to the same inexplicable detail. Wealthy, technologically advanced nations, nations with the infrastructure, the capital, and the scientific knowledge to handle their own waste, are choosing to pay to send it somewhere else. Not secretly, legally, openly. Why would the richest countries in the world pay to give their garbage away? What do they know about that garbage that the rest of us do not? Here is a fact that changes everything. The world produces over 2 billion tons of solid waste every single year. That number is expected to nearly double by 2050. 2 billion tons of discarded material, flowing through a global system, passing through dozens of hands, crossing oceans, changing ownership, and being bought and sold at every stage of the journey. Does that sound like waste to you? Or does it sound like a commodity? Because that is exactly what it is. Aluminum recovered from recycled cans is worth more per ton than freshly extracted bauxite or copper stripped from discarded electronics sells for thousands of dollars on international commodity exchanges. Certain grades of sorted paper waste are traded globally the same way wheat and crude oil are. There are professional brokers whose entire income comes from buying and selling nothing but other people's garbage. So why does the public not know this? Why does society continue treating waste as a burden rather than a resource? Because the people who profit most from its hidden value need the public to keep thinking of trash as worthless. The moment consumers understand that their recycling bins are feeding a multi-billion-dollar international commodity trade, the questions become uncomfortable. The pressure for transparency becomes impossible to ignore. The industry's entire profit model depends on a world that sees waste as a problem to be managed quietly and cheaply, not a resource to be tracked, valued, and fairly distributed. And the trail gets darker the further you follow it. Shipping containers leave ports in the United States and across Europe every week, packed with materials officially labeled as recyclable commodities. In reality, many contain a toxic mixture of low-grade plastics, chemical-saturated packaging, and electronic waste that no licensed facility in the exporting country would legally be permitted to process. Investigative researchers tracking these shipments have found materials from American and European households in open-air dump sites in Malaysia, in unregulated processing yards in West Africa, in river deltas in Southeast Asia, Is that a failure of the system? Or is it the system working exactly as designed? To understand how this machine actually operates, you need to stop thinking of the waste industry as one thing. It is three distinct industries layered on top of each other, and each one feeds the next. The first layer is collection and disposal. This is the part visible to ordinary people. Trucks, bins, transfer stations, landfills, and incinerators. It looks municipal. It feels routine. But behind this routine is a business generating tens of billions of dollars annually. In the United States alone, 2 companies control the majority of residential and commercial waste collection. Their combined revenues exceed $40 billion a year. These are not public services quietly keeping streets clean. They are profit-driven logistics empires operating at a scale most people never consider. The second layer is materials recovery. Once waste is collected, the materials inside it do not simply disappear into the ground. They are sorted, separated, and processed. Modern recovery facilities use high-speed conveyor systems, optical scanners, and increasingly, artificial intelligence to identify and separate valuable streams from mixed waste at extraordinary speed. The output is commodity bales, dense, compressed blocks of sorted material ready to be traded internationally. Baled aluminum.
Balai Copper-Bearing Circuit Board.
Baled mixed plastics. Each with a market price. Each with a buyer waiting somewhere in the world. And then there is the third layer. The one that operates furthest from public view. The international brokers. These are the intermediaries who purchase baled materials from recovery facilities in wealthy countries and sell them to processors in nations where labor is cheaper, oversight is weaker, and regulatory enforcement is limited. The material moves across oceans in shipping containers. It changes ownership multiple times. It passes through broker networks that leave almost no traceable paper trail. And at every transaction, someone takes a margin. Your old laptop might be dismantled by hand in a workshop with no ventilation. Its trace quantities of gold and palladium extracted through acid baths that would trigger immediate criminal prosecution in the country where you first purchased it. Your plastic packaging might be melted down in a facility releasing toxic fumes into a community that never had any say in receiving it. Is this what recycling was supposed to mean? And does any of it explain why the wealthiest nations are still paying to send this material away, rather than keeping the value at home? Consider the true scale of what we are describing. The global waste management market was valued at approximately $2.3 trillion in 2023. It is projected to surpass $3 trillion before this decade ends. That makes it larger than commercial aviation, larger than the entire global pharmaceutical industry, larger than the agricultural export economies of most individual nations. And almost none of it receives proportional public scrutiny. The commodity markets built entirely on recycled materials represent staggering economic power. Secondary aluminum alone, metal recovered from scrap rather than mined, is worth hundreds of billions of dollars annually in global trade. Because recycling aluminum requires 95% less energy than primary production, manufacturers in aerospace, automotive, and packaging industries will pay significant premiums for it. Recycled beats mined on cost every single time. Electronic waste is an even more striking story. In 2022, the world discarded an estimated 62 million tons of electronics. Embedded inside that mountain of broken phones, obsolete computers, and outdated appliances was approximately $91 billion worth of recoverable gold, silver, copper, and rare earth metals. Less than a quarter of it was formally recycled through any certified process. Where did the rest go? Different nations have built entirely different economic strategies around these realities. Japan has developed urban mining, the systematic extraction of metals from discarded electronics, into a national industrial policy. Germany has built one of the world's most rigorous producer responsibility frameworks, legally requiring manufacturers to fund the full life cycle management of their products. South Korea exports waste processing technology as a growth sector in its own right. And on the other end of these flows, nations absorbing tens of millions of tons of foreign waste annually, feeding informal processing economies that employ millions of people under conditions that the exporting nations would never tolerate domestically. Is this a coincidence? Or is it a structure that someone built deliberately? Now return to the detail that has been waiting at the center of this story from the very beginning. Why are the wealthiest nations on Earth paying other countries to take their trash? Is it laziness? Is it negligence? Or is it something more deliberate? Consider this. If waste genuinely contains enormous value, and we have established that it absolutely does, then why would any economically sophisticated nation give that value away? Why pay a broker to export material that could generate revenue if processed domestically? Researchers who have spent years inside this industry keep arriving at the same uncomfortable answer. It is not that the waste has no value. It is that extracting that value responsibly costs more than the value itself, when you are required to follow the rules. Processing mixed plastics produces toxic chemical residues requiring expensive containment. Dismantling electronics releases carcinogens, heavy metals, and flame retardants. Managing these byproducts in compliance with strict environmental and labor standards is genuinely, substantially costly. For lower-grade materials, the cost of responsible domestic processing can exceed the recoverable market value of the material. So what happens? The waste gets exported. It gets reclassified as a recyclable commodity on shipping documentation. It becomes someone else's problem, in a country where the cost of processing it is lower precisely because the consequences of processing it dangerously are borne by communities with less political power to refuse. And the companies arranging these exports, many of them are publicly traded. Several hold international environmental certifications. Some have won sustainability awards. How is that possible? That is the final piece. Here is the truth. This system was never designed to eliminate waste. It was designed to move it, price the movement, and profit at every stage of the journey. The moment the world recognized that waste contained embedded economic value, two incentives collided. The incentive to capture that value, and the incentive to avoid the environmental cost of capturing it responsibly at home. The solution was to build a global market where waste could be traded across borders, processed wherever compliance costs were lowest, and described in official documentation as something cleaner and simpler than it actually was. The regulatory architecture that enables this did not emerge by accident. It was shaped over decades by industry stakeholders who understood that the difference between waste and resource is, in large part, a matter of classification. International trade frameworks contain deliberate ambiguities. National definitions of hazardous material differ, just enough to permit systematic movement across those definitional gaps. Brokers operate in the spaces between legal systems with practiced precision and complete legality, and ordinary consumers, placing their carefully sorted recycling beside the bin with a quiet sense of responsibility, continue filling those containers without ever asking the one question that would unravel everything. What actually happens after the truck leaves? The trash industry is not hidden. It is hiding in plain sight, behind every recycling logo, every corporate sustainability report, every municipal collection contract. It is one of the most profitable industries in the world. And it is powered by the one resource that human civilization has never once come close to running out of. The next time you tie up a garbage bag, pause for just a moment. What you are holding is not refuse. It is raw material. It is the starting point of a supply chain that crosses oceans, passes through the hands of brokers and processors in a dozen countries, and feeds manufacturing industries that most consumers have never heard of. It is currency in a trillion-dollar global trade built on the collective assumption that once something is thrown away, it no longer matters. Somewhere at the far end of that journey, someone is profiting from the thing you just discarded. A logistics executive in Rotterdam, a commodity trader in Shanghai, a processing operator in Kuala Lumpur, a corporation whose annual revenue exceeds the GDP of entire nations, whose name appears on no product you have ever purchased. The waste industry is not a footnote in the global economy. It is one of its load-bearing walls. It is built on consumption, sustained by ignorance, and defended by complexity. And it depends, above everything else, on one simple thing: your willingness to throw something away without ever asking where it goes.